AITA for not wanting to pay the extra money my MIL put for a gift I didn't ask for. I decided to give her such a gift too. So, this whole thing started about a week ago and I'm still kind of reeling from how absurd it all is. I'm genuinely trying to figure out if I'm being petty or if this situation is just as weird as it feels to me. For context, I've been married for a few years now, and my relationship with my mother-in-law has always been complicated. Not necessarily bad, but definitely laced with these subtle jabs and passive-aggressive moments that make it hard to fully trust where she's coming from. It's that kind of dynamic where you're constantly asking yourself, was that a kind gesture or a calculated move? Anyway, I have a perfectly good coffee machine. It's nothing fancy, but it gets the job done. I use it every morning, and it has never given me any issues. I never once mentioned wanting a new one. Never complained about it. Never said I was in the market for a different model. Nothing. But last weekend, my mother-in-law came over to visit, and she brought with her a brand new coffee machine. Like, boxed, with the store's bag still half attached, receipt folded inside the manual, everything. I was a bit surprised. I thanked her, albeit confused, and asked why she got me a new coffee machine. She just kind of shrugged and said something about seeing it on sale and thinking I'd like it. Okay, odd, but not totally out of character. She does this thing sometimes where she buys me things I don't need, and it often feels more performative than thoughtful, but I always say thank you and try not to overthink it. So I accepted it. I didn't jump up and down with excitement, but I was appreciative. Here's where it gets weird. As she's putting her coat back on to leave, she casually says, "Oh, by the way, you owe me $30. I honestly thought she was joking at first. I asked her what she meant, and she told me that she originally planned to spend only $50 on my gift, but the cheapest coffee machine she could find was $80. So I needed to pay her the extra $30 she had to put in. I was floored. I asked her why, if she only wanted to spend $50, she didn't just get me a different gift that cost $50. She looked at me like I was the crazy one and said she didn't care about the extra money if it meant I'd be happy. I responded, maybe a little bluntly, that clearly she did care, or else she wouldn't be asking me to cough up the $30. She said it was just a matter of principle, and that if I had any manners, I'd pay her. Then she left. Just walked out. I sat there stunned. Who does that? Who buys someone a gift, and then demands money for it? If it's a gift, it should be free. If it's a purchase you expect reimbursement for, then it's not a gift. It's just a transaction. She texted my husband later that evening saying she was still waiting on the $30 and that if I didn't pay her, she'd come take the coffee machine back. I told my husband, very plainly, to go ahead and tell her to come take it back. I didn't want it under those conditions. I never asked for it. I wasn't pining for a new machine. I already had one that worked. The whole thing was just unnecessary. But then my husband started acting like I was being unreasonable. He said he liked the new machine and was already getting attached to it. I looked at him and asked what that even meant. How do you get attached to a coffee machine after a single day? He said it just worked better, looked nicer, and made mornings easier, and that we should just pay her the $30 and be done with it. I told him that if he wanted to keep the machine so badly, he could pay her the $30. He told me no, because the gift was originally for me, so it's my responsibility to pay the difference. This is where I kind of lost my cool. I reminded him that I never asked for the damn thing, never hinted at wanting it, and never agreed to some sort of copay arrangement for gifts. I told him that just because someone slaps a gift label on something doesn't mean you're automatically obligated to keep it, especially if it comes with strings attached. He accused me of being petty and making a big deal out of something small. I told him I was standing on principle. This woman brought me something I didn't ask for, called it a gift, then flipped the script and demanded money. That's not a gift, that's manipulation. And now she's threatening to take it back like some kind of weird hostage situation. Honestly, the whole thing has left a really bad taste in my mouth. Not just because of her behavior, but because of how quickly my husband sided with her. Not once did he stop to consider how bizarre it is to give someone a gift and then demand partial reimbursement. Not once did he say, yeah, that's not how gifts work. Instead, he tried to guilt me into paying for something I didn't want, just to keep the peace. So now the coffee machine is still sitting on the counter, unused, like this weird symbol of our disagreement. He refuses to pay for it. I refuse to pay for it. She hasn't come to take it back yet, but I honestly kind of wish she would. I don't even want to look at the thing. I've told a couple of friends about this and gotten mixed reactions. Some think I should just pay the $30 and move on. Others agree it's the principle that matters and I'm right to stand my ground. But I still feel like I'm living in some alternate universe where people don't understand how gifts are supposed to work. So, internet strangers, am I being petty? Should I just give her the $30 and pretend it never happened? Or is this whole situation as off the wall as it feels to me? Update 1. Okay, I didn't expect to be back with an update, but here we are. Buckle up, because this just spiraled in a way I did not see coming. So, a few days after the whole coffee maker drama, things had gone quiet. A little too quiet, honestly. My husband, Jake, and I were in this tense Cold War phase, him tiptoeing around the topic, me still irritated that I had been gaslit into thinking I owed someone $30 for a gift I never asked for. It wasn't even about the money anymore, was it ever, but the principle, the audacity, and the weird guilt trip from both my mother-in-law and, disappointingly, my husband. Anyway, Sunday afternoon rolls around. I had just finished some laundry, settled onto the couch with a book and a steaming mug of coffee from my faithful old coffee maker, you know, the one that didn't come with an invoice, and I was finally starting to let the whole thing go. Then there's a knock at the door. Jake answers it. I hear a muffled, awkward, "Hey, Mom, we weren't expecting you," and that's when my stomach dropped. It was Linda. She walked right in without so much as a glance at Jake, holding this large reusable shopping bag in her arms like it contained some kind of sacred relic. There was something in her face, smug, determined, like she was about to teach us some grand lesson we'd thank her for later. She made a beeline straight for the kitchen, completely ignoring me on the couch. It was like watching someone on a mission from a Hallmark movie if the Hallmark movie was written by someone with a petty vendetta. She spotted the new coffee machine still sitting on the counter and turned to me, unfazed. In the most breezy, offhand tone, she said, "So, I assume you have $30. I didn't even hesitate. I calmly stood up, walked into the kitchen, and said, "No, but you can have the coffee maker." She blinked, stunned. For a split second, it looked like she didn't know what to do. Then, in the most unnecessarily dramatic move I have ever witnessed, she reached over, unplugged the coffee machine like it was life support she was ripping from a patient, hoisted it into her arms with this exaggerated sigh, and turned to leave. Not a word. Not a glance at Jake. Not even an acknowledgement of how ridiculous she looked, cradling this coffee machine like it was a wounded soldier she was rescuing from enemy territory. I stood there, just staring, stunned into silence by the sheer theatricality of it. Jake looked like someone had yanked the last Jenga piece from under his equilibrium. His arms hung at his sides, mouth slightly open, eyes wide like he couldn't quite believe what just happened. I almost laughed, but I was too annoyed. When the door closed behind her, the silence in the house was deafening. Then Jake turned to me, looking defeated, and muttered that I could have just paid her to avoid this whole mess. I shot back, again, that it was never about the money. It was about the principle. About not being manipulated under the guise of generosity. About not having my boundaries bulldozed because someone else thinks their gesture trumps my autonomy. And about not being put in a position where my choices were either pay a fake gift tax or be made to look ungrateful. He sighed, the kind of sigh that says, "I don't want to fight about this anymore, but I also kind of blame you for how it went down." He mumbled something about not wanting to come between us, which honestly just irritated me more. Because let's be real, he already had, by refusing to recognize how weird and inappropriate the whole situation was and by expecting me to quietly go along with it for the sake of his mother's ego. He sat on the couch, sullen and quiet, while I went back to reading, or tried to. The tension lingered, thick and sour, and I knew we weren't really done with this conversation even if he wanted to pretend like we were. What really stuck with me was how quickly Linda had escalated things. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a difference in expectations. This was a calculated act. She'd brought a bag specifically for the machine. She'd come with the assumption that either I'd hand over the money or she'd take back her gift. That wasn't an impromptu visit. That was a move. And here's where it gets even messier. The next day, I noticed Jake seemed a little off. More than usual. Quiet, distracted. I asked if everything was okay, and he said he'd stopped by his parents' house after work to smooth things over. When I asked what that meant, he hesitated before admitting he gave her $30. Not for the coffee machine, he said, but to just end the drama. I laughed, genuinely laughed, because I couldn't believe it. He had gone behind my back, to the woman who created this circus in the first place, and paid her off. He said it wasn't worth the stress and that he just wanted to move on. I told him that was his choice, but that I hoped he understood he had just reinforced her behavior. That now she knew all she had to do was push hard enough and her son would cave. He didn't respond. Just stared at the floor like he'd realized it too, but was too tired to argue. I spent the rest of the week feeling off. Not just irritated at Linda, but disappointed in Jake. The worst part of it was realizing that I wasn't just dealing with a mother-in-law who didn't respect boundaries, I was also dealing with a husband who was afraid to set any. I've been in enough therapy to know what codependency looks like, and this had all the signs. The don't rock the boat mentality, that just do it to avoid conflict, the way he threw me under the bus to maintain peace with her. I started wondering how many other small moments I'd dismissed as harmless quirks or family dynamics that were actually part of a bigger pattern. I haven't brought it up again yet. I've been sitting with it. Watching. Paying closer attention to the interactions between Jake and Linda, and noticing the way he always defers, always placates, always tries to keep her happy even when it costs him, or me, something. It's not malicious, I don't think. But it is unhealthy. And I'm realizing that if we don't address it, this whole coffee machine saga will be the first of many. Anyway, I thought that was the end of it. Update 2. So, I've been stewing. Not just over the machine anymore, but over the entire circus act that unfolded afterward. The absurdity of being given a gift that came with a bill, the absolute gall of someone showing up to my house unannounced to repossess said gift, and the cherry on top, my husband deciding to quietly pay her behind my back like I was the unreasonable one. That was the part that kept clawing at me. Not just that Linda pulled this manipulative stunt, but that Jake let it happen. That he enabled it. That he didn't even try to hold her accountable or acknowledge how backwards it all was. It wasn't just a coffee maker anymore. It was a symbol of how warped their relationship is and how easily I can be thrown under the bus to keep the peace. And the thing is, the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was tired of just taking it. Tired of being expected to smile politely while being dragged through this passive-aggressive obstacle course every time his mother decided to assert her dominance in the most backhanded way possible. So I decided that if we were going to start this gift with invoice game, then fine. I could play too. Linda's birthday was coming up in a couple of weeks, and I remembered a conversation we had months ago, where she went on and on about this gorgeous high-end juicer she saw at a kitchenware store. Not just any juicer, this was the Bentley of juicers. Sleek, stainless steel, multiple settings, self-cleaning, quiet motor. The whole package. She had swooned over it like it was a European lover from her youth. So I made a little mental note and waited for the perfect moment. And this was it. I drove out to that same store, found the exact model she'd mentioned, and dropped $350 on it without blinking. I wrapped it like it belonged in a window at Saks, crisp white paper, elegant gold ribbon, even a matching card with her name in calligraphy. Inside the card, I wrote something incredibly warm and sweet, because I knew that would make the payoff all the more brutal. I drove it over myself and handed it to her with a smile she didn't know was laced with venom. She was delighted. Beyond delighted. Gushed over how thoughtful I was, how touched she felt, how no one had ever gotten her something so generous and beautiful. She kept saying how it was exactly the one she'd dreamed of. It was perfect. And I let her bask in it. 2 days later, I sent her a Venmo request. $175. Half the cost of the juicer. The note said, since we're doing partial payments for gifts now, thought I'd follow your example. Love, your daughter-in-law. She didn't text me. She didn't call me. She called Jake, sobbing. She said I was cruel. That I was trying to humiliate her. That I had weaponized kindness and turned her birthday into a personal attack. She kept repeating the phrase, "I can't believe she would do this to me," like I had keyed her car or left a flaming bag of dog crap on her porch. Jake stormed into the house after that phone call, furious. He asked me what the hell I was thinking. I told him, very calmly, that I was matching energy. If his mother thought it was acceptable to demand reimbursement for a gift, then she had no right to be shocked, and the same courtesy was extended to her. He said, "This is insane," like he couldn't believe we were still having this conversation, and then stormed off into the garage, probably to sulk and organize his toolbench or whatever it is men do when they can't handle their mother being held accountable. And then came the final act. Linda paid the $175. But that wasn't the end. No, she couldn't just take the L quietly. A few days later, Jake came home holding the juicer in its original box. Said she had returned it. Not to the store. To us. Complete with the ribbon and the card, now resealed in the envelope. Apparently, she told him that she couldn't accept a gift that came with a price tag on love. Update 3. After everything that happened, the Venmo request, the crying phone call, the dramatic return of the juicer, there was a strange, heavy quiet that settled over the house. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind where things feel resolved and you can breathe easy again. No, this was the kind of silence that wrapped around you like wet wool. Thick, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore. It wasn't fighting. It wasn't shouting or slammed doors or icy glares across the dinner table. It was just, nothing. A void. Jake and I moved around each other like two people waiting for the other one to blink first. We weren't arguing, not technically. We'd sit on the same couch but feel miles apart. Meals were short, polite. We weren't sniping at each other, but there was a tension so sharp I could feel it in my bones. Every morning, we brewed coffee like normal, but it didn't feel normal. It felt like we were pouring cups of resentment instead of espresso. I drank mine in silence, scrolling through my phone, while he stared into his mug like it might offer him some kind of divine answer. We were coexisting in a kind of emotional no man's land, where neither of us wanted to be the first to reinitiate warmth, but neither of us wanted to escalate things either. It was limbo. What sat with me the most during those quiet days wasn't the fight itself. It was the realization that I was watching something shift. That maybe I had drawn a line in the sand that Jake never thought I would draw. That I'd stopped playing nice for the sake of family dynamics I had never signed up for. And I think that unsettled him more than he let on. I couldn't stand it anymore. I stood in the kitchen one night, the clock glowing 9:47 p.m., staring at that old coffee maker and feeling like I was staring at some weird symbol of everything wrong. Not because it was broken. Not because it wasn't good enough. But because it had become this quiet witness to a situation I never asked to be part of. I turned to Jake, who was sitting at the table scrolling through something mindless on his phone, and I said flatly that I was not going to spend the rest of my life being the woman his mother could manipulate through guilt-wrapped gifts. If he wanted peace in this marriage, it was going to have to be a two-way street, not me doing emotional gymnastics every time Linda decided she wanted to stir the pot. He didn't say anything right away. Just looked at me, and then went back to his phone. I remember thinking in that moment that maybe this was it, maybe this is how people quietly begin to drift apart. Not in a blaze of fights or betrayal, but in silence. In resignation. But the next day, everything shifted. I came home from work expecting more of the same cold silence and awkward cohabitation, but when I walked into the kitchen, something was different. Sitting on the counter, in place of the old machine, was a new coffee maker. Not the same one Linda had brought. Not one from a flashy boutique brand that screamed, "Look what I spent on you." Just a simple, sleek machine, one I recognized from a day months ago when Jake and I were shopping for kitchen odds and ends, and we had both paused at it, admiring the design, the simplicity. We had both liked it, but decided we didn't need a new machine. It had been a throwaway moment at the time. Apparently not for him. This one didn't come with a box or a receipt propped up passive-aggressively next to it. There was just a small note, barely larger than a post-it, sitting on the counter, "Sorry." This time, no strings attached. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic. But it felt sincere. Intentional. Like he'd finally seen the point I had been trying to make, not just with my words, but with my silence. It wasn't about coffee. It was about feeling like a pawn in someone else's emotional game. It was about trust, and respect, and boundaries. I didn't say anything. I just quietly made us 2 cups. Mine with oat milk and a dash of cinnamon, his black with a single sugar cube, the way he likes it. I handed him his mug while he sat on the couch, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, we drank together without the air between us feeling like it needed a mediator. No side glances. No sarcasm. No tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Just 2 people sharing something small, familiar, and comforting. It was the first coffee in over a week that didn't taste like bitterness and stubborn pride. As for Linda, she didn't stay silent for long. Of course she didn't. A few days later, I got a long, rambling message from her. It was classic Linda, passive aggression carefully laced with faux concern. She said it was a shame that we couldn't communicate properly. That all she ever wanted was to do something nice and that it hurt to be painted as greedy or manipulative. That she was misunderstood. That she was heartbroken that her attempt at kindness had become a point of division. It was a performance dressed up as vulnerability, and I'd seen enough of her shows to know the difference. I didn't match her paragraph for paragraph. I just replied with a single sentence: a gift is about joy, not a bill. If we figure that out, we can move on. She didn't respond after that. The old coffee maker still sits next to the new one. I haven't had the heart to get rid of it. It's like a little relic of this entire saga, flawed, but still working. Still reliable. Still a reminder of where this all started. I switch between the 2 sometimes, depending on my mood. Not because one is better than the other, but because now, neither of them carries that heavy emotional weight anymore. And somehow, with the silence broken, with no invoices, no guilt, no drama folded into kitchen appliances, the coffee actually tastes better. Honest to God, it's the most delicious coffee I've had in a long time.